Hello and welcome to another tutorial on the Mage class in Hordes.io. Today we will be focusing on solo farming in the ranges of 7 to 10 Hellspawn stacks. Firstly, we will begin on a beginner's setup for newer players to the game and those without advanced gear. Later on, we will move on to an advanced setup as you can see the requirements on screen. So, firstly, the beginner setup. What kind of stats do you need to have? Well, ideally you prioritise item find, intelligence, and the last stat being luck or critical or haste. Ideally, this applies to you if you're below sort of the 400 EDPS range. The skills that you're going to want to use are displayed on screen. The ice block is used in cases of emergency, and the other skills I will move on to in a second. And so, moving on to the skills. Hypothermic Frenzy is to be used first, as this decreases the cooldowns of your other skills as well as increases the damage output they produce. Next, you have Chilling Radiance. This is to be used to hold the mobs in place and allow you to use other skills on the mobs. Next is Orb. This is really useful for bursting the mobs and does the most DPS out of any of your skills. Finally, you cast Frostcall on mobs. This is to be used while standing still, and as soon as the chilling effect stops happening on the mobs, you want to start moving as well. Make sure to keep using Frostcall every time it's off cooldown on the mobs to ensure the slowed effect is always applied to them. Now, a lot of you may be thinking, this is quite simple, Velen. How can I have up to 400 gold per hour? Well, this takes me onto the advanced setup for mage farming. Ideally, stats-wise, you want to have 16, 29 or 38.5 haste, and those are the key breakpoints. And therefore, on your gear, you want to have item find, luck, intelligence on all pieces with as much haste as it takes for you to get to one of those three breakpoints. I'll say them again: 16, 28.7 and 38.5% haste. Now, onto the skill setup. Compared to the beginner setup, it's very simple. However, using Arctic Aura level 3 will improve your DPS by roughly 10%. Then, what are the rotations? There are 5 rotations that you will use depending on the mobs that you will hit. This is the names I give to them, and just for reference in this video, these are what I will be referring to them as. To give you an indication of what sort of rotation to use on what sort of mob, here is a table which I think represents which rotation you should use for each set of mobs. This will vary a little bit depending on exactly how much EDPS your farming setup has. So, the first farming rotation. This is very simple and similar to the beginner's one. You want to use Hypothermic Frenzy, Chilling Radiance, Orb, Frostcall, and then when chilling effect stops happening, use Teleport, Orb and Frostcall. This should, for the mobs it's intended to be used for, kill them in roughly 40-second waves. Farm rotation 2 is quite similar to the first, however you will be using Candle to chain your Chilling Radiances. Once the first Chilling Radiance has worn off, use the second, and this can be paired with either Talon or Gamble. Gamble will give you slightly more gold per hour, but if you don't feel like risking that 1000 gold, then instead you can use Talon. Farm rotation 3 is fairly simple. You will be using the normal rotation, as otherwise known as the first farm rotation, and then you will be swapping to the second farm rotation on alternate waves. This can be used when mob respawn times are too quick for your cooldown on Candle or Skull. However, you can, in theory, completely negate this by relogging between waves. for farm rotation number 4, here is a detailed diagram of how to use it. You will be using Candle on your hypo first, and then equipping your Gamble before you hit the mobs, as the mobs will take the lowest item find of the whole time they have been tagged. So please use Equip Gamble before you hit the mob. Then you can use Chilling Radiance and Skull and your normal farm rotation. This is the first farm rotation and then complicated into a second hypo on the second half. Generally, this is used against high-level mobs such as mooses. I quite often like to use this on Moose Terrace 8 Hellspawn stack to get roughly 350 gold an hour. Finally, the most annoying rotation to do. This is probably not worth doing just for the sheer burnout it causes. However, it's quite satisfying to chain all at once. On screen is the diagram once again of how to use it. It is basically the same as farm rotation 4, but Gamble is never re-equipped or taken off. In theory, you can swap Orc for Gamble before you tag the mobs just to help you gather faster, but I really can never be bothered to do that. The only time I ever use this is when I'm doing Moose Terrace 10 Hellspawn stacks in 4 luck. Speaking of Moose Terrace, what spots should we be farming? Well, firstly, which spots are not to be farmed? These spots generally have less than 13 mob count at the spot and are at low Hellspawn stacks and high HP. Try and avoid these spots as much as possible. Generally, North Fable is not the place to be. Moving on to the medium mobs, I would suggest using spots between 120 and 135 gold per hour quite normally. The other spots are generally highly competitive, and therefore this is the most consistent gold per hour that you can get. These generally have between 13 and 14 mob count, and again prioritise the highest Hellspawn stacks possible. Moving on to the most gold per hour spots that you can find, or at least the high gold per hour spots to find. These are generally spots with more than 15 mob count and are sometimes gold skull spots. The highest as ever is always going to be Moose Terrace, and when using Gamble you can see that the item find percentage being higher means generally higher gold per hour. I find the difference is somewhere between 15 and 25%, depending on the spot, but Gamble of course has that risk of losing 30 gold upon death. Here is a generic map on screen where red spots being places absolutely not to farm, orange spots being dodgy places to farm, yellow spots being your average safe places to farm, and light green and dark green being the most competitive spots. And then of course we all know about Moose Terrace. So thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you found it very informative, and do send any requests for other videos in the comments below. Thank you very much, and goodbye.